did after the electoral storm.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Litchfield Budget Committee, June 22nd. Call the meeting to order, and we'll start tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I have a smaller crew here tonight. Mr. Hayes, Ms. Douglas, and Mr. Barca were unable to join us this evening. No remote participation tonight, so we will move along in our agenda to review and additions to tonight's agenda. Anyone have anything they would like to add? Okay. Next on our agenda is public input. We will open it up for our first public input session. Seeing no one here, we'll close public input, and we'll have one more public input session before we adjourn this evening. Next is correspondence. I'm going to read the correspondence summary that Ms. Stevens put together for us, as well as one email that I shared with the Budget Committee today that we'll read in full. So, correspondence summary since the last time we met in May. On May 24th, School Board Rep Andrew Cutter shared the May 24th School Business Administrator's Report. On May 26th, bookkeeper Heather Sneman shared the May Town Budget Report. She also shared a comparison of town expenses from January to May 2002 and 2003. On May 27th, Town Administrator Kleiner notified the committee that Doug Nickel has rejoined the Litchfield Fire Department as part-time fire chief. On May 29th, Recording Secretary Matt Sullivan shared the May 25th draft meeting minutes. On June 1st, Fire Chief Nickel invited the committee to attend a push-in ceremony and open house to celebrate the town's new fire truck beginning its service. On June 3rd, Chair Sun forwarded an invitation from town leadership staff to attend tours of the Highway Department, Transfer Station, Library, Police, and Fire Departments. Selectman Representative Leary requested an adjustment to the schedule, which Chair Sun obliged. On June 12th, Office Assistant Donna Burrell sent the meeting notice for the department tours. There were no quorums present at either of the tours. On June 16th, Ms. Simon shared the June budget report, May revenues, and May special fund balance. On June 20th, Ms. Kleiner forwarded an overview of New Hampshire state laws from the New Hampshire Municipal Association on the requirements for public meetings, posting agendas, and public records. On June 21st, Mr. Cutter shared the BA report from last night's school board meeting and also answers to questions from the May 25th Budget Committee meeting as well. And then finally today on June 22nd, Dan Mitchell, Jen Grantham, and Jake Hess shared an email regarding district surplus and questions around a potential budget freeze, and we were asked to read this email into the minutes, which I will do right now. Chairman Sun, we ask that the following statement be read into correspondence at your next Budget Committee meeting. To the Litchfield Budget Committee, at the May 25th, 2023 Budget Committee meeting, it was brought up that the school district budget surplus may have resulted from a budget freeze or staff being denied resources or materials. As the principals of the three schools, we want to clarify for the Budget Committee that although this year had an elevated consciousness of spending, at no time was any budget request that had a direct impact on learning or teaching ever denied. Further, at no point this year was a spending freeze implemented or directed by Dr. Jetty, Superintendent, or Mr. Totten, Business Administrator. Thank you for the opportunity to answer this question and correct any misconceptions that may exist. Sincerely, Jake Hess, Principal at Campbell, Jen Grantham, Principal at Litchfield Middle, Dan Mitchell, Principal at Griffin Memorial, CC'd to the Litchfield School Board. And with that, that captures our correspondence since our last meeting in May. Next on the agenda is...
Sorry, did you mention something? There was questions and answers?
I did.
And where would that be found?
We will get those put on the portal. I can read those right now. Just let me find them real quick.
I have them here if you'd like.
Yeah, I've got them. So these were outstanding questions that we had from the school board meeting, from the Budget Committee meeting to the school board back in May 25th. The first question was confirmation that the projected FY23 underspend includes summer payroll. Ms. Douglas reminded Mr. Cutter that this has been missed in our calculations in the past and can result in a large increase to projections. And the response was that this has been confirmed. Mr. Taylor requested a breakdown of staff attrition, specifically a count of staff that have left that are resulting in positions that we've been unable to fill, as well as a count of staff that are resulting from a reduction in forced positions that are eliminated from the budget due to decreasing enrollment. The following positions have been and this was the response. The following positions have been vacant throughout the 2022-2023 school year. 4 custodial positions, 15 paraprofessional positions, part-time PE teacher, 2 vacant sped teachers, a receptionist from January 1st, 23 to the end of the school year, athletic administrative assistant, CHS special ed teacher from March to June. Positions the district didn't fill with direct hire but needed to fill through contracted services was the speech language pathologist. Other positions were RIF'd, and those were RIF'd during the FY23 budget process. And then the third question was, Mr. Taylor and Ms. Douglas have also requested updated financials specifically related to solar. Given the delays for install, how does that impact the economics that were presented to the voters in March of 2022? And the response was, as everyone can appreciate, this is difficult to calculate. All are in agreement there is an impact to the economics and projected return on investment that was presented. Ms. Douglas did send a follow-up question to that and just asking for, do we know when we might be able to have a calculation on that? And she said she thought she had heard an August meeting being mentioned and was just confirming that. So that was today. All right. Next on the agenda is review and acceptance of minutes from May 25th.
Make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
A motion from Mr. Burke.
Second.
Second from Mr. Leary. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstain, motion carries 6-0-0. All right, moving right along tonight. Next is town business. So we'll turn it over from Mr. Leary to Mr. Leary for any updates from the town.
Okay. Just a couple of things. We appointed, the fire department has promoted Paul Kelly to captain. Paul's been with the department for many, many years. And he'll be a nice addition to Chief Nichols' staff. We did that swearing in at the last meeting. There's going to be a 4th of July parade. It's not really a town function, but they came to us for approvals, and we passed all the approvals, so that's going to take place from the gravel pit north of the Hidden Creek Golf Course and proceed down to either here, and then the old cars going down to Campbell or something, I think it is, and maybe a run through town somewhere. And then we're talking about trying to get a farmer's market going in town. That was one of the items we discussed the other night. So that's just in the beginning stages, so hopefully that will catch fire, and I think it'll be a nice thing. And the last thing is we're going to do an energy commission, which is going to look into saving the town money with electricity costs, possible water, where we can save money on water, including maybe buying out our system, and just general things like that. That's also in the beginning stages, and we're just forming a committee. We have 2 selectmen on it, and there's a couple of other boards that have members on it in town.
Will there be an opportunity for a budget committee person to be a part of that?
I don't know if that was on it, but I can ask. I don't see why not.
I wasn't volunteering myself. I was just.
Sounds like you were. And the other thing was you sent me an email around 5 o'clock for Heather to open up a link or something, so I forwarded that to her.
Thank you.
She'll probably get it in the morning.
Does the Energy Commission also, could that include the school district too?
The school is going to have a rep on it, yeah.
Fantastic.
We reached out to them and they wanted to do it. We don't know who, but
Yeah, okay.
I thought I may have heard.
Doug?
No, I think they said Heidi Ames or Liz McDonald, but I'm not sure.
This may have been talked
Don't
about
quote
a
me on
couple
that.
of meetings ago.
Okay. But yeah.
Before any questions from Mr. Larry, I do want to mention, I read this in correspondence and just wanted to circle back to this. We did have, last week we had, I think at the request of a couple of members, tours of facilities in town. And so we had one evening where the Budget Committee was invited to tour the Highway Department and the transfer station. Unfortunately, due to a lot of conflicts, we only had one person from the Budget Committee that was able to make it that evening. But I just wanted to publicly thank those two departments for their work to have everything set up, laid out, present. There are recordings that are available of those for people to watch if you weren't able to make it. The same for fire and police the next evening. We had 3 folks who were able to join that evening and get tours of those facilities and ask questions. You should have gotten an email today with the links to those recordings so that you can go and watch those at your leisure. But I just want to thank all of those departments for really opening up their time, answering questions, and I think certainly if you get a chance to watch those videos and you have follow-up questions, then we can certainly reach out to them with any follow-up questions. But just wanted to thank them for their time.
Thanks to Mr. Blanchett for
Yes.
for doing the recordings of those as well.
Yep, absolutely.
And Mr. Sullivan for recording.
Yes. All right. With that, any questions for Mr. Leary?
Mr. Larry, question as far as the status of like the fire chief in relation to the budget. Are you thinking that was still going to continue to roll into the second half of this year with the contracted police administrator, police chief, or is there going to be
You talking police or fire?
police?
Okay. All right. Yeah, we
I don't
just.
need to get into the details of like who, but are you
Yeah.
expecting that it's going to continue on a contract basis?
Yes.
That would be, and how much does that differ from what was budgeted of a
Salary.
full-time employee? I assume the contract is higher than the salary.
The contract, no, because he's part-time.
Okay.
So it's actually, it's hourly, the hourly figure is higher, but it's less money in the long haul because he's part-time right now. We have started a search. We've hired MRI resources to help us with finding a new police chief, and that process, as I understand, has just started, so hopefully we'll have something very soon.
Okay. Then question number 2, again, related to police. I know that the reader board at the corner of Albuquerque and 3A a while back had, job openings. There was a lot of discussion around one of the positions being eliminated in the budget for this year because of the person that was on.
On deployment, yep.
Yes, exactly. So at this point, are we back to only that one position for deployment that is?
No,
Okay, so there is still a
They're-
little
they're
bit of a cushion
short-staffed,
based
yeah,
on some
they're-
other openings?
yeah, and, well, there's a cushion, but you're gonna see a very large increase in overtime because they're
Sure.
so short-staffed that, they have to cover the shifts, and so there's gonna be a lot of overtime, but.
And then, sorry if I could just finish off on the police, SRO wise?
That was going to be my follow-up.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Any
Yes.
status on SRO, or at this point, you can't really do it because of,
Well, they know who they want,
Yep.
but we don't have the bodies to be able to put somebody there. I mean, like I've said in the past, I'd like to see one at every school. But we have 2 that are approved by the voters, and they're just so short-staffed that they can't afford to lose a body right now. But as soon as they are, they will be going to the 2 schools.
Any other questions for Mr. Leary tonight?
Just a quick
Yeah.
one. I'm just curious, like, how weekend coverage is going at the fire department. If they sense anything, any difference of being there. If you get any feedback from them or not.
I haven't heard anything from Chief Nickley on that, other than it's been going well. So, I mean, I guess no news is good news. But there is an increased call volume on the weekends because, you got all the sports and everything like that. But there hasn't been any issues that we've heard of, so. I think it was a very good thing that was approved by the voters. I think we needed it.
All right. With that, we'll transition to school business and general updates from Mr. Cutter.
So thank you, Chairman Sutton. You covered off on the questions that we were tracking since the May meeting in response to Mrs. Douglas and presumably the follow-up you have an email on the solar economics. Look, at the end of the day, right, that's really difficult for the school to calculate, right? And to go back and to rerun numbers based upon when we think solar's going live, which we don't actually know, right? That's still a forecast, and we think December, maybe January, but that's an estimate. And further, it will take our business administrator quite a significant amount of time to rerun all the numbers and to put together new economics, and for really what value? What are we trying to prove? Right, we are in agreement, there's an impact to what was presented to the voters, when it was presented in March.
So I guess the follow-up on that would be, okay, there was no problem in figuring out what the credit was going to be and the ROI in order to pitch this particular project. I find it very hard to believe that, okay, I understand you don't know when it's gonna go live, but you do know how many months it hasn't, and I'm sorry, Andrew, I don't mean
No,
specifically you, I just mean for the school. There's a certain amount of time that has already passed. So that's lost. That's a fixed number. I don't know why we can't get an answer as far as how much have we lost based on, whatever, 14 months, let's say, of not having the panels up, selling back power. That's the part that is getting very frustrating, and why I keep asking is because, look, I understand that we don't know when it's gonna go live, but you know when it wasn't, and you should know how much you would have had it been live during those months, because you had no problem going ahead and having that to be able to justify the voters approving it. So, if I can ask yet again,
I think if there's a way to see, like, what have we spent in heat and oil, or things that were expected to come out of the budget over the course of that, call it 12 to 15 months, that we have had to pay for, that have had escalated costs associated with them. I understand, like, rerunning the entire project is a lift for Doug, but that one seems kind of just some low-hanging fruit of, here's what we spent in, heating and oil that we weren't planning on spending, that was coming out of the budget to help
There's actually no
offset.
cost in oil, because they weren't using oil.
Right, I
Pump the
mean,
oil out of the
the
ground.
vast majority of our over expenses
Electric now.
is very specific in the expense report, which you have access to
Right.
underneath LMS electricity.
That should be the only expense.
Right, and I can tell you, it's high.
Other updates, Mr. Cutter?
Yes. So I'm also in receipt of some questions here from Mrs. Douglas this evening.
Yeah,
Did
she
you-
sent those earlier today, and those were in response to the sharing of the BA report and end of year expenses that you all voted on last night.
Okay.
So
Shall we talk about that?
we can, and I think if we want, and Miss Douglas isn't here this evening, so I think if there are some of these that we can provide an answer to, that's great, and that's less work on somebody on the school side to have to answer those.
Yeah, sure. So question one's about food service and staying in the black next year, and the concern that as an encumbrance that you'll see on the file, that the board did transfer $50,000 from unassigned fund balance to cover the deficit that ran on food service this year. As a part of the way to reduce that from a much higher number down to 50, we actually increased school lunches to offset a much larger negative balance. I don't have an update from food service. I believe Ms. Crowley is going to be coming to present to the board in July for an update to talk about this very point and how do we make sure that we're charging the right amount and that this program stays in the black so we're not having to cover it going forward.
And so there could be another potential increase in costs going into next school year.
I'm not sure yet. We'll see what their proposal is.
Okay.
I do know that it was presented to the board that there has been a decrease in paper products and some of the costs that factor into a school lunch. Let's see here. Number 2 is a comment, not a question. Number 3, what impact will these safety additions have on the annual and long-term maintenance schedule cost? I'm not sure what safety additions she's referring to.
I think it had to do with the Wi-Fi at LMS. I think was kind of lumped in as a safety item. Surge protectors, safety item.
Yeah, I mean, so we can go through the encumbrances and maybe talk about this as we go through each of the encumbrances.
Okay.
The CHS and LMS auditorium upgrades, there was a comment by Ms. Douglas that they should be on warrant articles. The board did talk about that. That was a question that was raised at last night's meeting. And the idea was that because a lot of these are deferred maintenance. They do need to be funded and paid for with the money that we have unassigned, from unassigned fund
In
balance.
lieu of waiting another year.
In lieu of waiting a whole nother year. Yep. What impact will these upgrades have on annual, so same question, we can go through that when we go through all the encumbrances. As noted above, the 2020 DC class trip refunds ought to be offset by student activity fees. So the board was really puzzled on what to do. So this is a result of, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, there was a DC trip that was planned for middle school during COVID. There was fundraising that was done by that class to offset some of the cost. That money was used to pay the vendor that was supplying the DC trip to the school district. And in any event, once it got canceled, we couldn't claw that money back, right? And so that money was lost. However, that was never presented to the parents who did all the fundraising, and essentially that fundraising was lost. The board's been trying to figure out the best way to make the students who did all that fundraising and all that hard work whole. And there's no good answer that's gonna be, solving everybody. But the ballpark number of what that loss was $10,000. And so we took the $10,000, and we agreed to put it into the student activity account. So that money can be used as a class for senior activities.
So I got a question about that, because I heard that during the meeting, and I'm just wondering why, and, I mean, obviously the school, you can do what you want to do, but, so they put the $10,000 in, which is fantastic. Are the students who raise the money, like, let's say I raise $700, and let's say my senior expenses are $500, am I gonna receive $500 for my expenses? Or is it gonna be equal across all the
It's
seniors?
equal across all the students, right? So again, that's why it's not it's not a great plan for all those kids that did raise a significant amount of money and those who didn't, right?
Right,
It's
but you
going
have
to
all
the-
those in the same class, so why wouldn't you just give them the money, not the kids who didn't raise the money? I'm just curious as to why it's not going that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can ask, I don't know the
Yeah,
answer to
I
that.
mean-
The direction from the school was just level fund it and let the students use it for their activities, senior
And I'm
activities.
sure that's what the parents are asking, who, their students fundraised.
Yeah.
It's like, why is Johnny getting some of Mary's money? But I know that they're, at least they're getting something.
Yeah, and that was the idea, right? We wanted to make the students whole to the best we could in some fashion, and there's no good answer to solve this. Question 7's about LMS surge protection tied to the renovation. Why is it not coming out of that project budget? Well, if you'll notice on the encumbrances, and again, we can get into that here momentarily, but you'll notice a transfer of encumbrances, where is it? Of $116,000. It's row 11 on that spreadsheet that I shared with the board. That $116,000 is very specifically to cover the deficit out of this current fiscal year's budget, right? So by adding, so we don't have money from these funds to pay for that anymore. We're already running in the red, right? And so we're using the unassigned fund balance to cover our remaining deficit. The surge protector would have just been added to that, and we would have covered it by unassigned fund balance anyways.
Now, that's because, if I remember correctly, the school board decided to go option 2, which was pay out of the unassigned balance, instead of, I believe, option 1 was fund these, then go ahead, because that is a capital improvement project, then take that money out of that fund after it's been replenished.
So that's specific to row 12 and the 55,610, not directly related to the surge protector or LMS. And so just going down the line here, maybe it just makes sense to do all the encumbrances, so I can
That's
walk
fine.
through it.
Yeah.
Is that all right? So in terms of unassigned fund balance and moving into the spreadsheet, if everyone has access, it was projected that our end of year fund balance is $900,000, right? We believe that's a bit conservative. It might be a little higher than that, but ballpark, that's where it's gonna land, per the confidence of our business administrator. In addition to that, we had some revenue come in, one for $132,000 and another for $222,000. So our total remaining fund balance is $1.2 million.
Can I ask you a question before you leave the
Yeah.
revenue piece? So the house bill revenue I get, what's the revenue over expected? What's that from?
I'd have to check the source. I don't know off the top of my head.
Just to be a little more specific on that one, if you could just ask Doug if that is, he's mentioned a few times that there was a potential funding source that he could get for the LMS project based on the fact that it was energy saving. I don't know if it's that, or if that's still on the table, or if that's off the table.
Yep, I can ask. Any other questions before we move on? So taking the 1.2 as a starting point, as mentioned, we covered 50,000 to food service to cover the deficit. We also, per what was voter approved in March, we transferred 125,000 to the building maintenance capital reserve fund, another 125,000 to the capital improvement expendable trust fund, as well as 100,000 to the employee benefit reserve fund. All those were voter approved this past March. All right, so then moving down the line here, as mentioned a moment ago, we had $116,000 in deficit related to the capital projects. That took us down to $738,000. And then in addition to that, and Mr. Taylor, where your question was, there was also an additional $55,000 that was specifically related to the elementary school and costs associated to the elementary school, not the middle school, right? And there was a debate amongst the board at our first June meeting, June 1st, I think it was June 1st, on whether this should be directly from the unassigned fund balance or whether we should have a public hearing and then withdraw that from the capital reserve. The will of the board was to use the unassigned fund balance to pay for that. Okay. So then, you know, our starting point minus all the transfers is $640,987. From the $640,987, the board reviewed a series of encumbrances, really as a collection of encumbrances over the past 2 years, because we didn't do any upgrades or any encumbrances really for the purposes that were initially intended last year because of the deficit. So purchase of radios for all 3 schools for $42,000. This is in addition to radios. We have some radios. We don't have nearly enough radios. This isn't supplying radios to every classroom. It's supplying radios to some classrooms. And this $42,000 allows direct communication to emergency services should and when it be needed, or if it be needed. In addition to that, an expansion of the blue light system at all 3 schools. So this adds additional blue lights in the bigger areas of those buildings, such as the gym, cafeteria, and auditorium, which the board felt was really a safety issue that needed to be addressed.
I think before you leave those two, like when I think about Ms. Douglas's question around the safety items and the ongoing maintenance costs, like I think those two fall into that bucket.
Okay, so radios, as we all know, they have a useful life. If I recall from the police, just using it as an example with radios, I think the useful life is between 5 and 7 years.
Yep.
I would anticipate, I don't know that, I would anticipate it's something similar.
And the blue lights, is there a maintenance, like an annual maintenance fee or program associated with that?
I don't believe so. It's just a hookup and it's an alert type of thing where the light kicks on. Yeah, and there's already blue lights at each of the schools that was already funded through a grant. This is an expansion of that system. The Gator. So the Gator's been talked about for quite a few years on the budget committee as well as the school board. This was actually one of the items that was encumbered last year, and then we withdrew the encumbrance in September. And this is, you know, replacing a Gator that is used very heavily by a number of departments at the high school and is well past its useful life.
It's embarrassing to see that thing drive across the field.
The current one be retired, donated,
Yeah,
something?
yeah. Yep. LMS Wi-Fi, this was actually brought up by, including Mr. Barker actually, and by many other residents in town as a safety issue. Notably when We had the Wizard of Oz production, and there was larger community events at the schools, including at the middle school for basketball games. This was also brought up where there is no access by anyone to connect to connect to the outside world. You're completely blocked. And one of the ideas that we were really pushing for, that I was pushing for, quite frankly, is let's get our network enabled so we can have the splash page similar to what the town has, and you're essentially accepting the rights of whatever you're searching for, and it gives the school district the ability to monitor and just keep track of who's connecting and when. It's specifically being asked for LMS Wi-Fi because LMS is the oldest Wi-Fi system in the district. GMS and CHS already have this capability, and it's being turned on over the summer. We want to bring LMS online to go along with the other two schools. The initial cost estimate for that was $50,000. I know our IT director worked very hard to I'm going to butcher this. I think it's an Aruba system, Aruba network system.
Good guess.
Okay, all right. Worked to get a great price on an Aruba network system. Going down the line here, a multi-year reading contract. So this is actually an item that is in the approved budget. The item that was budgeted for and voter approved was $75,000 for year one, and then an additional $25,000 for the next several years to go into this program. One of the things we were trying to do is instead of having an annual type of contract, we wanted to see if there was an opportunity to have a multi-year contract. This is a new program. It was piloted over the past year. It's been to much success in the district with improvements across the students. In short, by funding an additional $53,500 on top of the $75,000 that's already in the budget, we will be saving a significant amount of money, $41,500 over the 5-year term. So the board felt, given that savings, given that this program is going to be staying for the next several years, that's savings that we could fund now and then reap the benefits over the next several years.
I think that's a good use of the money. Like, I appreciate the cost savings. I think, and it could have just been a timing thing as to why this wasn't in the proposed budget. Like, we didn't ask the question of could we do
A multi-year
contract and pay up front to and I think, and the reason I mention that and bring that up is because I think, we had a lot of those conversations going through budgeting season on both the town and the school side. So I think moving forward, if there are opportunities for multi-year deals where we can lock in rates and either pay up front or pay annually, then that can be cost savings to the taxpayer in the long run.
Any other questions on that one? No. Moving into the final items here for encumbrances, CHS auditorium upgrades. There is a direct need for a projector, screen inputs, essentially an upgrade to the audio visual equipment in the auditorium at the high school. There was a direct need for a soundboard. Our soundboard that controls all the equipment is non-operable, and to put on the productions, we borrowed sound boards from another town. It was very generous of them to let us use that and to help us out. The soundboard piece of this is a several $1,000 piece of equipment in and of itself. That is being paid for specifically by the activity fund for the production as a result of the productions that went on. Right, so there's no cost to the taxpayer on the replacement of the soundboard. However, in order to upgrade the 20-year-old systems that are in that space, the board felt $35,000 to fund this was a maintenance item, and approved a new projector, screen inputs, and wiring for all the controls. In addition to that, the CHS PA system, the system that is used for announcements across the building, is in need of a replacement and an upgrade. This is, I forget the name of the system. The superintendent and the business administrator mentioned it last night, but they're upgrading to a newer system and putting it aligned with the same systems at GMS and LMS, as well as also adding some speakers in some of the bigger areas, notably like the auditorium and gym. LMS stage curtain. This was actually in dire need of replacement. This is many years old, and actually during a recent production over this past year, it got ripped pretty badly, and is put together with like Band-Aids and duct tape to hold it together. And given all the work that's happening over the summer, notably with that space at LMS, the kitchen right now is under complete construction. They started this week, right? This at the beginning of this week. And so with that, new ceiling tiles, new lighting, an entire new kitchen, new curtain to go with it. We talked about the transfer to the senior class and the DC trip, and then LMS surge protection for $7,500. And this is, in my mind, a necessary item. We have now many millions of dollars in electrical equipment at the middle school, and this is to protect at the source of the electricity coming into the building, surge protection to protect all that equipment.
Did the current surge protection we have in place fail?
We didn't have a surge
We
protector.
didn't have it. Okay.
We didn't have a surge protector, and it wasn't part of the electrical design for some reason.
Thank you for walking us through those questions.
So when all that's
Go
said and done, right, when all that's said and done, at this point in time, we are also, there's a remaining fund balance. That remaining fund balance that we believe will be sent back to the taxpayers is $433,837. And just to take a note, we've also included the past several years of fund balance return on this file down in rows 27 through 31. And that is the highest return to the taxpayer minus our COVID year in fiscal year 20.
Questions for Mr. Cutter around end of year expenses?
Yes. 433,000. Over the last couple of months, we've had discussions about the fact that special education could potentially be going through the roof, and there's not enough money in that trust fund. And anybody that tries to cut any of those line items gets skewered. Is there a reason why the board is not considering taking some of that money and replenishing it based on
It has
The
to go to
recent
warrant
scale.
article.
Yeah, I think it has to go to
We
warrant.
can't do that. It has to go to warrant article for the transfer.
Yep. Other questions for Mr. Cutter?
Anything else on encumbrances?
It's, I'm not sure if it's really on encumbrances. It was about the 15 open para positions.
Okay.
So, it's kind of related. Is that something that, like, you have down here that, speech language pathologists can be filled through contracted services, so the para positions cannot? Is that because of the union contract?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're hard to fill.
Okay,
But if you know anyone,
right. That is, that's troubling. 15 positions.
It's a lot, yeah.
It's probably covered our special education expenses.
Another kind of key update I'd like to share with the board is at last night's meeting, we absolutely did vote on a new GMS or replacement elementary school on the land that the voters approved for in last March. The idea is that will be presented to the voters in March of 2024. In case you haven't heard, we did receive a letter of intent from the state with building aid for a total of $7 million that would be coming back to the district should that be approved by the voters.
That
Right.
went down from what was originally anticipated of around 10, right?
That's correct.
Because other monies were allocated towards
Other projects in the state.
larger projects, yeah.
Yep.
Any idea when you'll have the expected top line number for the warrant article?
It's actually in the capital improvement plan, which is
on the town website.
It's on the town website. The total number as of last year with interest was, I believe, $55 million. And then we are anticipating an increase on top of that, just given inflation over the past year. However, what I'd like to see in the capital plan is some reflection of the 7 million that will offset that as well, just for planning purposes. The board, in case you haven't been following, the board also, we evaluated several options. In addition to that, the board funded a small investment to look at an option that wasn't considered before, and that's what if we don't build an elementary school, and what if we consider an addition at the middle school as well as an addition at the high school. The addition at the middle school would be pre-K through 6, and the addition at the high school would support 7 through 12. There were a number of pros and cons. I think the notable one specifically with the middle school was that would be a school for 700 students, which would be the 4th largest in the state. Is that what we want to create for our town? I don't know. I mean, that was what the board talked about, right? In addition to that, renovation costs are also very sizable. While we didn't have fixed numbers presented to us, because of a variety of factors that go into those numbers, it was estimated based upon similar construction in neighboring towns that it would be somewhere in the ballpark of $30 million for both renovations.
And that's without interest or with interest?
That's without interest. That's just building cost.
So you're talking about, if my math's right, approximately 30% more to build a new building versus renovating the other two.
Potentially, I
interest.
mean, because if you look at the actual building cost for a new building, it's actually at $39 million.
Right.
So
30% more, but then you'd less the state building aid. You would not get state building aid if you did a consolidation project, right? Or would you?
I think it depends. If the additions would have met all of the needs that we set in our application to the state, we would have still been eligible.
If it solved those problems that were
If we solved the specific problems, yeah.
Well, you should receive it because it does solve the problems, because you're gonna get away from GMS.
Right. Look,
But there's like land issues at LMS. There's a number of other issues that also played into this.
I appreciate, I think, exploring that option, right? Because I at least I heard and had people ask about, have we explored all options? What about consolidation? And so I think, while I've had conversations with several people that I don't know that it was the right solution for instruction for kids. I heard you talk about disruptions last night, like what renovations would do to learning disruptions at both of those sites if we went that route. I think the fact that the time was taken to explore those options and to see the cost associated with it allows the school board to go forward and say, look, we've literally explored almost all of the options that are out there. Here's the cost associated with them. We've determined that this is the best option that we want to put forward. So I appreciate that diligence on that piece.
I appreciate the diligence. I'm a little disappointed that the architect didn't come back up front before going through the whole process and saying, okay, what you're asking, I actually can't give you a cost. I can give you an estimate, but I can't give you a cost. The specific ask was not for him to tell us, how the impact of students and, upcoming enrollments and things like that. I just asked for what was going to be the cost to renovate it. That would be up to the school board to figure out the pros and cons of, is it the right learning environment? Is it the right situation to put that number of kids? So the school paid for that work and didn't get an answer to the question that the scope of work was for. So that was the only piece that was disappointing, was that we couldn't get a hard number.
I have a feeling he would have done a much more in-depth look at it, and it would have probably cost a lot more to find exactly how much. The one thing I will say about Barker is that he does a lot of work with schools. That's basically primarily what he does is schools. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why he shared that information as far as disruption and that type of thing, is that that's his specialty.
But I guess that's not what I pay an architect for. I don't ask my architect to build the exterior of the house to tell me if I have the right ambiance in my kitchen to have people over for an event. You know what I mean? But my point is that he was given a scope of work. Technically, he did not do the scope of work. He should have looked at it and said, you know what you're asking, I'm not going to be able to give you a close cost. I can give you an estimate based on other districts and things like that, but what you're asking and what you want to write me a check for, I can't do. And that's the piece that frustrated me.
I think, knowing that that's what's going to go forward in the ballot now, like, I think the work that has to be done to send the right message of why this is the best option, there's a lot of work that I think has to be done on the school board side. And my hope is that the legwork to get in front of the 55 plus communities, to get in front of the veterans groups and everybody, to have conversations with those people, to hear their questions, to hear their concerns, to tell the story of why. It's literally going to be the biggest ticketed item that this town's probably ever seen on a ballot. And when the land only passed by 53%, to me, that's like, as someone that is a proponent of that, like, that's concerning, right? To me, the land should have probably passed by a lot more than that, because it wasn't as big of a ticket item, and there were ways that you could back out of it if you had to down the road. So, my 2 cents for what it's worth.
Was it a unanimous
Yes.
vote?
It's unanimous.
To support? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Cutter this evening? I do have one question, Mr. Cutter, and it has to do with and I don't remember when this started, but I believe it's been going on for almost a year, the website project. Do we have an update on where we are with that? Timeline, work to be finished, and what have we spent so far to still have the same website?
Oh, sure. So it's the same vendor that is actually hosting the current website. They have new capabilities that are far more mobile friendly, that for small dollars we're taking advantage of. I think the total cost was $5,000 for us to run up a new site, and they're supporting us with our asks for the build. There is a beta site that I have access to. I'm part of the website committee. I am also working with our IT director over the summer.
Isn't Mr. Barco, he's a part of that too, right?
Mr. Barker's a part of the committee as well. We're working over the summer to try and get this up by the start of the school year.
Or back to school?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The big issue is not necessarily the creation of the new site. It's already there, quite frankly, in the beta site. We also are using this as an exercise to clean up all the individual school sites. So GMS has its own site, LMS has its own site, CHS, and there's a lot.
Content migration.
There's a lot of content on those 3 sites that we're trying to figure out and clean up.
Never the content you're looking for, though.
Well, that's right. You can't find anything.
No.
Right. That's part
You're
of the
searching,
issue.
like, nothing. You find a calendar finally, and there's nothing on the calendar. It's like, oh, jeez.
Right.
I asked that question because I use it almost daily, especially for things like school board meetings,
And you're
lunch
probably
menus
accessing
and
it through your
stuff.
phone.
95% of the time through my phone, which is not a great experience.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's what we're trying to improve.
Okay.
So small dollars.
So there's
Actually-
no additional expected cost on top of that 5K?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. I mean, I actually did talk to Mr. Barca as a part of the committee, and just evaluating, not knowing what a website costs. It seemingly, I know Mr. Barker's in that industry, right? And he had thrown out an idea that it would be 10 times the amount to have an external company come in and help us with this. So it's not a lot of money. Hopefully people will find it far easier to use and navigate.
Great. Thank you. Anything else from Mr. Cutter this evening?
I think the only other thing I would add, Chairman Son, is just as a heads up, it is LEA contract year. And so those discussions will be starting here shortly. And I would anticipate that being part of the warrant articles for next year as well.
LAA was 2 years last time, and the support staff was a 3-year, right?
That's right.
To
So
stagger them.
now they're off cycle. Yeah.
Okay. All right. If nothing else from Mr. Cutter, we'll move into member input and new business. School facilities. I know we've hit on a lot of this stuff, but Mr. Bork, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to share from the last school facilities meeting, where a lot of the information around kind of the options was.
No,
was shared.
the last one, I think I presented, I mean, several have been canceled.
Yeah.
And there really was no sense in going forward until the school board took action last evening as they did, and then from there, I'm sure they'll start up again. And the last one, I think, basically was the 9 different options as far as the elementary school, and I already presented that to you.
Yep. Okay. Capital improvement planning. Ms. Douglas isn't here tonight, but Mr. Cutter, I know you're a part of that. Any updates from capital improvement planning?
Yeah, so, absolutely. So, in terms of capital improvement, the board is actually going through and receiving various needs from the departments. We're asking that for our July meeting, I believe it's mid-July with the 4th, that we have that so we can inventory it and update the plans. I believe the date was we're working back from an October timeline to be able to have the public hearing, present to the select board, and get it approved.
So, present to the selectmen in October?
September, October
September,
timeline,
October.
yeah. Yep. In terms of the school, specifically, and the needs, we haven't seen anything from the town yet. In terms of the school, we talked about this, last night. One of the conversation points was specifically on the LMS fields, the baseball field and the softball field. And given that if we move away from GMS in that site, what's the best option for those 2 ball fields? And if it makes sense to either have it continue to be a separate warrant article, roll it into another project, because in the capital improvement plan, there's also projects for redoing the paving and the parking lot at the middle school. Obviously, we'd want, if we're gonna do fields, we'd wanna do fields before that work happens, so it doesn't get destroyed. There is a plan for new fields at the front of the middle school. So if you're looking from the canopy that was built out into the parking lot in the woods, that's where the fields would likely go. That's where the design of the fields is.
Is there a reason why the existing fields couldn't stay intact? I mean, the problem at the GMS site is the GMS building. The fields are still there. Couldn't you just build a path between LMS to those fields just like they use today?
There's a walkway through the woods, right? That does exist.
Expansion of that walkway, maybe then at that point pave it, things of that nature, so that way you could have handicap access from the parking lot out to there. Seems like it would be a lot more affordable than building 2 new fields.
We talked about that, right? And again, it's because it's on the capital improvement doesn't mean it's actually going to be the actual ask. It's just what the anticipated need is. I can say that both of those ball fields are in very rough shape. Very rough shape. In fact, we've had some towns play our district over this past year and refuse to play in those fields because of injury to their players.
I would also think that, you mentioned paving a path, I think it would be similar to putting a road, an access road from LMS. I mean, I think it would be costly, you'd be going through wetlands, you'd have to be really careful, and plus it's all downslope too, so I mean, I would just think it'd be costly as far as to get it ADA approved.
Yeah. Well, 2 brand new ball fields would be very costly too.
But it'd be a soccer field there too.
Well, I mean, that's the thing.
The number for the 2 ball fields, I mean, it's in the capital improvement, you can
Yeah.
see it is $375,000.
The care of those fields, is that also under the support staff contract?
It is.
Anything else from member input, new business this evening? Or I should have said anything else, capital improvement. Is that good?
No, that's it.
Anything else from member input, new business this evening?
Yeah, just a quick member input, just taking a look at we started this school year at a deficit, the sky is falling, there's gonna have to be a tightening of the belt. It ends up at $900,000 surplus before some unexpected revenue pops in. And it becomes more and more difficult each year that I'm on this board, that, I hear the sky is falling every single budget season. Nope, that's too much of a cut. You're not giving us enough. You're not giving us enough. And then even in the worst of times, not only do you end up with a $900,000 surplus, we took a look at the unfilled positions, And it also asked around, what's the impact to education? I'm not hearing negative facts around those particular positions. And then follow that up with, we get the 3 principals that email us and say, you know what, there was no spending freeze. We just made sure that we were mindful of spending. So it just as we go each year, it's always the same story, and then there's always this bucket of money at the end. So at what point do we actually do it right and get it closer up front with the original budget ask, so they don't demonize people who want to actually ask a question or potentially cut something, and then all of a sudden at the end, those that over budgeted get to act like heroes that they're giving money back to the taxpayer. Like it's just this cycle with the school budget that just keeps going over and over and over again. Mr. Leary, I think the town budget, what the end of year surplus was only around 100 to 150,000, right? It was pretty tight.
Might have been less, yeah.
You're talking 7 million versus 24?
I get that, but
And the 150 was after they purchased items.
That's right.
that was after.
That's
Purchasing?
after they
Okay.
encumbered.
I do think part of the, I think when you look at the list that we saw of positions that remained vacant throughout the year, my rough math says that's approximately 23 FTEs, full-time equivalents. And yes, I realize some of those are teaching LEA positions, some of them are LSSA, so there's a varied salary there. But if you look at 23 and do some rough math, you're looking at $600,000 to $700,000 ballpark is my guess of that those positions not being filled is contributing to that not being spent in the budget.
100%.
So when I look at 900K, I really think, okay, 23-ish positions, call it 600K, 2/3 of that is because we have positions that weren't filled, either because we couldn't find people or we intentionally didn't fill those positions, like the Miss Flynn's position, for example, there was a decision not to fill that. So yeah, it's a big number, and I agree with you, but I think a big chunk of that money is because of these positions that weren't filled. For
That
whatever
is
reason, they weren't filled.
The vast majority of it, right,
Yep.
is positions that we are trying to hire for. They are posted on our website. There are interviews happening. We have not found candidates to fill those positions.
And I think what the principal said too, to add to that, is there wasn't a freeze as far as anything that would impact education. But I think they're also very mindful that maybe there were certain things they didn't purchase. That might be wrong, but I would think there are certain things that, I can do without that. It's got nothing to do with, educating a child. As much, it could be like office equipment. Who knows? But that was the question I was gonna ask, and I don't wanna put any more work that needs to be done because you just made the point. I was just gonna ask before you mentioned it, is can we get a number of what all those open positions save the district?
Yeah, the total number that was
cost
not
of-
spent
Right.
because of unfilled positions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it should be easy enough to get, because they were all budgeted
I have
before.
that somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, my math was very rough and a guesstimate.
No, but
it's
I'm
in that
sure it's a
ballpark.
good chunk of change, yeah.
And one last thing, not to pile on, but you said that you didn't hear any negative impacts to the lack of people hired in these positions. And being in, at least in the elementary school, almost weekly, there is definitely an impact to the teachers and the staff. And we're getting dangerously close to burning out a lot of them.
I agree with
So-
you wholeheartedly,
Yeah.
but then why wasn't that stated in the answer? The question that I had asked was, as far as the unfilled position and what's the negative impact of it? How does the administration not then say, look, we did this, but we are dangerously burning out our existing staff, so this is going to get worse. If I go back to Ms. Flynn's position, that was actually something that came up in budget discussion around, there was no intention coming into it that position was going to be, not filled and rolled back into the budget. That came from a discussion that we had during budget time. And that's where I get concerned, is how many of those positions is it, well, we've had that person, so that position almost stays in perpetuity, versus looking at it, and I think at one point I had asked, for the custodians, for example, would you be better off paying a little bit more to those that are doing the work? So at least they get something for the extra effort they do, and then maybe that means, you know what? I take 2 of the 4 positions, I use that to pay the people that are doing the work and are working extra hard, and then, you know what? The school gets the savings of not filling the other 2 positions. Like, there's, that's all. I don't disagree with you at all, and I know I've heard it. I was just surprised that I did not see that.
But doing
in the written
something
response.
like that, Scott, you'd have to have an MOD because it's all unionized. And it would have to be a sidebar conversation that you're raising rates of certain individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's a conversation that would have to you'd have to negotiate it.
Oh, I get it, and you know what? We got 2 negotiations coming up.
Yep.
And, every single time we talk about the negotiation and try to, mention something, we get the, oh, nobody will ever go for that. Nope, that's not gonna work. Well, at some point, somebody needs to sit at the other end of the table and dig their heels in as well. Whether it's,
But again, I think you'd be surprised at how many conversations are brought up like that during the negotiations. Haven't been part of a bunch of them, yes.
So we'll ask about it in 2 years when they renegotiate.
And the thing is, and I think when we have the principals in here during the budget process, I think when you ask them as far as the open positions and what impact that had, I think they can give you a good understanding of what it did have.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think back to, I don't know, I think back to like the spirit of your question, Mr. Taylor, like, I think the big chunk of that 900K are these unfilled positions. And, or there are other places where money wasn't spent to Brian's point of, they just chose not to spend it. Not that it was something that didn't, I think that I appreciated the principals putting that communication together because they were very intentional to say there was nothing here that we didn't have a freeze. We didn't not spend money that directly impacted instruction, but were they a little more cost conscious this year? Absolutely. I would imagine they were. Yeah.
And to give it a comparison, which you really can't, it's almost like sports radio, when they say we don't want to cross sports. But think of the town. So think if the town right now couldn't pay policemen overtime, right? So all your open positions, that money is just saved, right? You can't pay teachers overtime to run another class. It's
right.
So it's like 2 different animals.
All right.
I'm
go
sorry, one more question from Mr. Cutter, because I'd asked, and I don't know if it was when you were here or not, as far as the combination of bus 1 and 7, whether or not that could lead to any type of rebate from the bus company where they weren't able to supply us with the amount of buses. But one other point on that, and
Yeah, it's a good
I'm
call.
sure it's easy enough to find out the school year's done, but I just heard something. I'm concerned of the ridership on that bus, because I believe
Bus 7?
Right, I believe bus 7 and bus 1 are the 2 busiest routes. So my concern is that there were too many kids on that bus when they combined them. But the bigger question is, it seemed like half the year they couldn't supply us with the right amount of buses.
I think you asked that question when Mr. Plansky was here.
I may have.
I'm trying to locate that.
And just while you're looking for that, just to clarify, I'm assuming that we had the $900,000 surplus, but there was also about a $700,000 deficit going in, right? Going into the school year because of the LMS issues.
Right, but that was cleared.
Right, so I mean,
Not
so
out of this
cleared-
current fiscal
Cleared
year. though.
7 plus there was 900 extra, or it
No.
was cleared by
2 different budgets.
Okay.
Right, you're talking last year's budget and this year's budget. We had to close last year's budget even by September, right?
Okay.
Typically, it's due in July. We had an extension from the state to do it in September, which is why we had the special hearing and why the action was to use the trust fund accounts
Right.
to cover that out of last year's budget.
Okay, so July 1st, 2022, there was not a starting negative balance of anything. It was zero?
It was zero because in
Okay.
September, we cleared it.
Okay.
There is. I actually have it here. Let me just, so I have Mr. Plansky's notes from April 20th. Given the bus company had to combine bus 1 and 7 several times this year.
Yeah, that was the question. I can't find a reply to it. I don't know that we
I don't recall it.
Yeah, I don't see a reply to this, but I can follow up.
Okay, thank you.
And it was more than often. It was quite a bit.
Yeah, I remember the discussion because we talked about the fact that that contract is up at the end of
Next year.
next year, right? Yeah. Anything else for member input, new business this evening?
I have something small from the planning board. On Tuesday, we held a public hearing on the impact fees to make a small update to those based on what we have available, like the information that we had available on the capital improvement plan. So, and what those, and the board recommended to the Board of Selectmen to, approve these impact fees. So that will be at maybe the next Board of Selectmen meeting or the one after, where the Board of Selectmen will see that and make a decision on whether or not to adopt the new fee schedule. But, the largest, to calculate impact fees, you calculate how much new development might have an impact on, for example, new police station. We need an expanded police station. How much of that expansion can be accounted for by new development in town? So one of the larger changes were that I think it basically tripled the amount that we would be charging for police impact fees to help start to save up for engineering fees, things like that. And so anything on that capital improvement plan, you can start charging impact fees for, as long as it is caused by new development. The other part of it is the schools. The impact fee charge for the schools was close to the same, but because now instead of paying, they were originally calculated to pay off the Campbell High School bond and I think a little bit of work at LMS. So the majority of our impact fees were going into pots for Campbell High School and the middle school. Now, because those projects are off, kind of off the books, it would be the entire impact fee goes to the elementary school pot. So those are like the over changes, and then as the capital improvement committee creates their new plan in the fall, the planning board would plan to revisit those impact fees and try to do that on an annual basis. So that's what's happened so far at the planning board, and then now it's up to Board of Selectmen to decide whether or not to adopt those.
Is that on your agenda for Monday?
So,
It could be, I haven't seen the agenda yet. I would question the legality of putting all the school money into one pot, though, because I think we had that discussion before. And when the impact fees were first designed, it was for each individual school to use for new builds, expansions, and renovations. But putting it all into one pot, I don't think we can do that legally.
I think legally you need to, we asked if we could do it into one
I'll have
pot
to
for
check
the
with
school
Naomi.
districts, but it had to do with, it has to be attributed to a planned project, and because there's no planned projects that would increase capacity at the high school or the middle school, we
But they
can't
have
charge for
renovations,
those.
but they have renovations.
For
It
increased
can be used to
capacity.
upgrades. Can also
Not-
be used for upgrades.
But you're saying
Not
that
only if it increases capacity.
No.
That's
We
my
just
understanding.
No, we released money for the windows at LMS, we released money for lighting at Campbell, and then it turned out to be for the water pump, so it can be for upgrades,
Okay.
so.
So we'll-
It's not just for expansion, that was a gray area, and we had that with the library, which we released their funds for their pavilion that they're gonna build.
Which increased capacity.
I don't know about capacity, it gives them an outdoor space.
To build them a pavilion, should have given them the one out there with the light. Just moved down the road.
But either way, it was, that's where the planning board sits. That is just an update from the planning board, and it's, as Mr. Leary said, the Board of Selectmen will take it from here.
all right. Any other member input, new business this evening?
Yep, just one thing. Just want to report that the streetlights are now out.
That was an Eversource issue. It wasn't a town issue.
Yeah.
No, I don't think we were being charged for it because it was an Eversource issue. I don't know what the issue was, but they were all standing out there underneath them and they all went on in the middle of the day.
Oh, I saw, that was out by the boat ramp,
Yeah.
right? I saw that, yeah.
Right out here.
Oh, was that here?
Yeah, the first three.
Yeah, they all went out, took a walk out there and stood underneath them and they all went on. I asked if they were motion
Motion
sensors.
censored, yeah.
Daylight motion sensors.
All right, no more member input, new business. We'll move into public input. Second public input, seeing none. We'll close public input, and before we adjourn, just want to remind everyone that our next budget committee meeting is not until August, Thursday, August 25th. The budget committee typically does not meet in July, so we will have a couple of months off before we come back together, and really just one more meeting before we really start jumping into our big budget season. So we'll meet in August, and then our meeting in September starts the budget process with the town. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Tell me.
I have a motion by Ms. Stevens, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Burke, and all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstain, motion carries 6-0-0. Have a great night, everybody.
Okay.